Am I live? Okay, yes. Let me know when I start. Shall I go ahead? Okay, good. Good evening. My name is Eva Meyerhofer and I head the Environment Policy Unit at the EIB. And on behalf of my circular economy colleagues back at the EIB who were unable to travel, I would like to thank Martin for allowing me to say a few words on EIB's circular economy journey. So over the last 5 years, circular economy has been recognized as an important instrument to tackle the current triple planetary crisis of climate, biodiversity, and pollution. And in acknowledgement of this importance, EIB has recently created a dedicated circular economy division within its Environmental and Natural Resource Department, which not only coordinates and supports EIB's circular economy operations and activities, but also provides support through the development of various guides and tools and technical assistance for circular economy projects. And one example is the C3 Circular City Centre that EIB jointly runs with the European Commission DG RTD. So for the past 4 years, EIB has lent more than $3 billion to circular economy projects, mainly in industry, small and medium enterprises, bioeconomy, and resource management. EIB is striving to increase the support and impact in circular economy, an ambition in line with the EIB Environment Framework, which we just launched last week here at COP27. EIB would like to thank Circular Economy for the excellent good collaboration on the roadmap, and we look forward to addressing and developing the action points together with our MDB peers that you have here on the panel. We remain highly committed to support the transition to a more circular economy world and look forward to seeing you in Kigali on the 6th and 7th of December 2022 for the World Circular Economy Forum. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you for those kind words, and thanks for hosting us here in the EIB Benelux Pavilion. So why are we here? I mean, COP is around climate, around saving our world, and this, I think, is the last, for most people, I think the last panel between either flying home or having drinks in Sharm. But perhaps this is the most important panel. Let me explain why. So, circular economy has a massive role to play. Over 50% of global greenhouse gas emissions reduction can be achieved through the circular economy. Within that, most of the new infrastructure build out is going to be in low-income developing countries. And one of the big things that has to drive that change is financing. So it's with great honor that we have many of the representatives of the multilateral development banks here today with us. What we'll do, if you go to the next slide, to the agenda. If you go to the, oh, here, thank you. Here's the run-off show for today. We'll start off with a brief introduction of what we have been developing together with the panelists here, but also some of the people not in the room, or my colleague Marvin will do that. Then we have a panel discussion, and then the closing remarks by the Dutch Ministry of Development. And I think it's important to note that the financing for this project was provided by the Dutch government for the initial phase, and that we're now working on securing the financing for the next phase of the project. So, without further ado, Marvin, do you want to take the floor and explain a bit what we have been doing in the last couple months and the topics of today? I'll do that afterwards. Yeah.
All right, thanks a lot, Martijn. Then let me just skip through the panel introduction right now and dive into what we've actually been doing. So in the next 10 minutes, I want to run you a bit through actually the why, the how, and what exactly we've been doing in this International Financial Institutions Circularity Exchange and our roadmap. So first, the why. Martijn already pointed out it is important to better understand actually what role the circular economy can play in greenhouse gas mitigation. So the potential of the circular economy has not yet been leveraged. In the last 50 years, we actually have tripled our annual consumption of materials, and we have now reached 100 billion tons of material consumption. The interesting part is that 70% of greenhouse gas emissions are actually linked to material use and handling, which shows the potential the circular economy has also to reach climate goals. Currently, the world is only 8.6% circular, and that again shows what potential we can actually leverage. The second question is, of course, why did we reach out to international financial institutions and multilateral development banks? They play a crucial role. Why? Of course, the triple planetary crisis, as mentioned earlier, is transnational, it's global. We also have to tackle it globally, so we have to work together. The international financial institutions are, by definition, working transnationally. Second, investments for development actually have to decouple from resource use. Especially in low and middle income countries in the past, a lot of the development has come from extraction, and that has to change. We have to decouple to actually make also the low and middle income countries grow and develop quicker. And lastly, the MDBs and the international financial institutions are already very active. They are aware of the problems that we're facing with climate change. So in 2020, they committed $66 billion into climate finance. But the role of resources and of the circular economy remains unclear and needs to be leveraged. That leads us to the how. How can we actually do that, and how do we do that? First of all, we created this circularity exchange network to exchange, to help the MDBs also to harmonize and to collaborate more on the issue of circular economy. Who was part of this? It's basically three groups. So we had our knowledge partners, of course the Dutch Ministry for Infrastructure and Water Management, who co-funded it, but we also reached out to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, to the UNEP Finance Initiative and their connection to the G-Funds network, and to Chatham House to help us reach new knowledge and more insights towards the finance transition for the circular economy. Second, and most central, of course, are the multilateral development banks. So we're very honored that experts from all these different multilateral development banks were part of this exchange and are also represented here. And lastly, we also reach out to the private sector, private banks. That is important also to create new financing instruments, blended financing instruments, to help the private sector. The multilateral development banks have to help the private sector to de-risk their investments for the circular economy. Also, the Intesa São Paulo will be present today on the panel, and we're thankful for the contributions of the others as well. So what did we actually do? Yeah, like I said, we had some exchange sessions, but we also created a high-level roadmap. So without further ado, this leads up to the release of the Unlocking the Potential of International Financial Institutions in the Circular Transition, a high-level roadmap. Let me now very briefly run you through the most important topics. We have 4 key overarching areas identified. I will now give you a brief explanation for each of them and an example of one of the objectives that we have identified to move the needle and create more financing opportunities for the circular economy. The first is link circularity to the environmental objectives. That's repeating what I said earlier, but it's important that we understand that the circular economy concept can be leveraged to actually meet the objectives defined in the Paris Agreement. So what could be a next step? What could be an objective? In our roadmap, we identified, or we said that we need to identify country-specific target sectors where material use and waste have to be reduced. So that can, for example, be the construction sector. And that's very relevant because it depends, of course, on the region, it depends on the sector. The second point that we have as one of the key focus areas is to improve assessment methods for circular economy investments. Currently, the field of indicators, of definitions for the circular economy is pretty scattered still. So what we need is a shared vision. We need to understand how we actually assess, how we actually measure, and how we track circularity. We need to speak the same language. What does it mean on our roadmap? It means we need to align on actual definitions. It can be as simple as what is a circular business model? Simple. We need to align on what indicators we use to measure and track. So in general, we need basically global taxonomies for the circular economy, also to create benchmarks. Third, the international financial institutions have to build internal capacity for the circular economy transition. Currently, the circular economy is not part of most of the international financial institutions' strategy, but we need to put more focus on that. So what does our roadmap suggest? Build more capacity. What does it mean? It has to become priority for senior management. The awareness making that we're trying to do also with this event, of course, also has to reach the senior management. But also, we need trainings for staff that work in critical positions. So that is especially client-facing staff that does not yet understand the potential, also the business potential, circular economy solutions and business models have. Lastly, as the fourth overarching key topic, we need to develop mechanisms to de-risk investments and improve funding. What does it mean? We need new financing instruments that reconsider risk and securities of circular projects. So far, ownership of resources is often considered a risk, while it can actually be a security. Your supply chain is secured. You have no linear risks facing. So it's not a risk. We have to rethink that. What does it mean in practice, for example? We have to reevaluate risk assessment models. And maybe also for new financing instruments, we have to set up a global circular economy fund to actually de-risk the circular economy business models and solutions worldwide. So that sums it up. Of course, there's many more objectives on this roadmap. It's only a short preview, so if you really wanted to dive deeper into it, you can have a look at our roadmap. This is the overview where you can see on the left today and on the right the upcoming 10 years. It's structured very clearly into these four overarching themes. Have a look. If you have questions, do not hesitate to ask us. So what are the next steps? What do we have to do now to ensure that the work that we're doing so far also continues and actually gets actionable? We need to formalize the continuation of this exchange. It's great that we have all these great partners in multilateral development banks at the table, but we need to continue this exchange to move to the circular economy. Second, we need to improve and actually implement the actions that the roadmap is suggesting. Currently, of course, it's very high level. We need to fine-tune them for the respective institutions and also make them actionable. And last but not least, I think we need to explore a global circular economy fund to basically take off one of the boxes of the roadmap already. So that is my summary for the roadmap. Like I said, do not hesitate to reach out, and thank you.
Hebben de mensen online of niet? Ja. All right, thanks Marvin for that great introduction. So without further ado, let me introduce the panel. So we have Miranda Schichter, the climate lead from Ellen MacArthur Foundation, one of our knowledge partners. And then we have Divina Malinjuela, if I pronounced that correctly, almost. You have to grab the, if you want to correct me, you have to grab the mic. And next to her we have, and she's with the, she's the principal program coordinator of the African Development Bank. And next to her there is Valerie Hickey, the global director, Environment and Natural Resources and Blue Economy of the World Bank. And I think we're checking if we also have the online participants. But let me start with this group. So let me ask the first question to you, Valerie. So I think there's 4 main topics on the roadmap: linking circularity with the existing environmental objectives, developing assessment methods, building internal capacity, and developing mechanisms to de-risk and improve funding. If you sort of look at those 4 building blocks, which ones are sort of the most important and resonate most with the World Bank, and why?
Thank you, Martin, and thank you to the EIB for hosting this. I want to take a step back before I answer that specific question and talk about why the World Bank is even interested in circular economy. And I agree with you, Martin, that this is one of the most important meetings, panels we have here, not because I'm on it, but because we're living in a world right now where we're in a little bit of a civil war between those people who say we've got to grow now and clean up later, or we have to grow now and clean up while we do it and have a green, resilient and inclusive growth. And these are real discussions that are going on. It's going on in cabinet rooms, it's going on in boardrooms, it's going on in the press. And we have this sense that it's an either or, and it's not, it's a both and. And circular economy is how we have both. It's how we can grow now. We don't have to sacrifice growth, but we do it in a way that makes sense, that delivers for development, it delivers for climate, and it delivers for nature. And so that's why it's important. It's also important, by the way, to have that conversation here, because it amazes me. We're all talking about climate change, which makes sense. There's a lot of conversation around nature and the link to nature-based solutions. There's no conversation around waste or pollution. It's part of, I mean, this is the third of the triple environmental crisis. It's affecting more people than climate change is right now. And it's more tangible for a lot of people. You know, 6.5 million people die every year from air pollution. That many people are not dying from climate change. Don't get me wrong. Climate change, terrible. But so is pollution. And we have to make sure that we keep this on the development agenda and don't lose it. And not just because it matters for development, not just because it's a bad environmental good, but because waste is inefficient. It's not cost effective. Marvin talked about the 100 billion tons that are of materials that are consumed every year, they're produced every year. 90% of that goes to waste. And materials are getting harder to find. You know, 20, 30 years ago, you would have to dig up 50 tons of earth to get a ton of copper, where there were copper seams. Because you had about a 2% of in a copper seam. Now you have less than half of 1%. So you're digging up 200 tons of earth to get your 1 ton of copper. And so that's leaving landscapes scarred, it's leaving bodies scarred. I always think in this space of Kabwe in Zambia. This is an old mining province, about 100 kilometers north of Lusaka, the capital of Zambia, about 200,000 people. It's the most polluted place on earth. You have kids there, the WHO says no amount of lead in the blood is safe, but there's an absolute ceiling of 5 milligrams per deciliter of blood. In Kabwe, kids routinely have between 45 and 150 micrograms, right? This is no way to live. And think about, now that we have to produce 4 times, we have to dig up 4 times as much land to get the same amount of copper. And that's just an example, what that means for pollution, because what it means for processing and all that goes into it, the use of water, the use of energy. So the circular economy isn't just a nice thing to have, it's not just smart because it cuts through the either or dialogue. It's an absolute must-have for economic growth, and that's why the bank is involved. But what do we need? And this is where we're interested and where it overlaps with the map, the roadmap. We think pricing has to change, and we think regulation needs to change. And there's 2 things that are going to help those happen is the pillar on metrics. Because that's the only way to really think about price differently and to make sure that companies who belong to the circular economy or who believe it's important to go down this path can be rewarded. I mean, right now, it costs $72 more per ton to use recycled plastic than to use virgin plastic. So right now, circular economy companies are not competitive. We have to think about price differently. We have to figure this out, and that's built on having better regulation. And what regulators need are metrics. And that's why having these metrics, making sure we plug these metrics that the roadmap will help us identify into things like the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosures, Task Force for Nature-Related Disclosures, because these platforms are having an impact. These platforms are driving competition and driving virtuous competition. They're making sure that companies and countries, because we're doing this with regulators too, with central banks, not only understand the impact they're having in a negative way, but the dependency they have. And thinking about the circular economy metrics. So for us at the bank, the pillar on metrics is critical. What's not critical, and what I really hope we don't do, is have a circular economy fund. We have to defragment the financial architecture in this space. We cannot once again think the answer to everything is a new fund. A, because there's just no new money. So do we really want to spend what money there is on setting up the architecture for a new fund and the institution? I don't think so. I think there are enough ways to put money out there. And if we're serious about circular economy replacing the linear economy, we shouldn't nicheify it. We shouldn't say this is something you need a separate fund for because it's something you do over here. We have to normalize it, which means we have to help regular banks, not just multilateral banks, regular banks where profit matters, where shareholder value matters and it's measured in dollars and cents, become part of financing circular economy. Yes, we need to de-risk. Yes, we need to figure out all of the de-risking instruments, and there's lots of good examples of what that means, whether it's co-investment, everything that's out there, insurance, risk reduction mechanisms, we can do it all. But let's not have a separate fund. Let's mainstream this and normalize financing for circular economy, because if we don't do that, we end up keeping this as a niche, nice to have, not the must have that we really think it is.
Thanks, Valerie. So pricing, metrics, don't nicheify, but normalize. I think that would be my summary of your great intervention. Thank you so much. So let me turn to Davina next. I would love to get your perspective, but also, of course, your geographical perspective on the roadmap.
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, let me convey the African Development Bank's appreciation to join the panel, and of course the EIB, our host, to speak after Verily. Most of the issues she's articulated about having the right standards, making sure that we normalize circular economy, that is part of the development pathways of regions such as ours in Africa that are most impacted by climate change, but are also still in development. And so it's very crucial as a pathway, because it has both benefits for the environment and benefit for the people. Just as example, she listed in Zambia, the kids in Zambia, and the impact that pollution has on their lives. One thing that I would want to add on the list that Marvin articulated, for sure policies are very critical. Capacity is very critical. Data is very critical. And for us at the African Development Bank, maybe I'll disagree a bit with Valerie on dedicated finance. Sometimes you're going to need dedicated finance when you're dealing with trying to understand concepts that are not mainstream. So as we are noted in the mainstreaming, just like we have climate finance, one could say, no, that is development. Let it fit in the development pot, because ultimately we want sustainable development. But, and I speak as having sat on the table trying to articulate circular economy. We didn't know what circular economy was 3 years ago at the bank. we understood, we invested in waste management, but we didn't call it circular economy. We didn't even know the value chains that come with it. And we still are trying to figure it out. And to do that, to even sit around, okay, so how do you define a project as circular economy? We realized that we needed dedicated funds to now come up with proof of concept. And so the facility that we started a year ago, that was approved actually this year with funding from the Nordic Development Fund and Finland, was to define proofs of concept. There was already a country-led initiative for the Africa Circular Economy Alliance on circular economy, but there wasn't much in terms of how do you define a circular project? And similarly, there was already a network of practitioners for the Africa Circular Economy Network across Africa. There could be, I think, 100 members of it. But what is that group? There are waste pickers, there are teams that do, at the basic level, recycle plastic. And so when it comes to financing, those become very difficult. They cannot access financing. I remember sitting on a panel with one of the practitioners, and he said, I'm not looking for finance to even scale my business. I'm looking for finance to define a market study, because when I go to the bank, they ask for a market plan for his business. It's like, that is the kind of financing I'm looking at. And so this little facility is to deal with those issues, very primary. How do you make a business case? How design a business plan for a circular program? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I like how you also emphasize the capacity building element of it, but also the impact on jobs. And I like your example of the local waste picker. And that, like, if we have circular economy interventions, we also always have to think about that means for the people on the ground, the jobs affected, etc. Thank you for your contribution. So we're delighted. We're also joined by two online participants. Apologies for the technical issues. We have Leah Kerrer. She's International Sustainable Strategist with the Global Environmental Facility. Welcome. And we have Luigi Riccardo. He's head of the Circular Economy Desk from Intesa São Paulo. So he's, I think, with us representing the private sector. So let me turn to Leah first. Leah, you have sort of being brought up to speed on the roadmap we have been developing. We've been in touch in the last period. I would love to hear your reflections also from the Jeff on this.
Great. Thank you so much, and it's a real pleasure to join this panel. I really wish I could be there in person. This is the circular economy as a concept that has gained in importance here at the Global Environment Facility, where we've been playing an increasing role through the Platform for Accelerating Circular Economy at a global level, but also incorporating circular solutions into the national and regional projects that we fund, particularly related to electronics, textiles, and plastics. And so all four of the things that were highlighted are relevant to our role in fostering circular economy approaches, but since we are a multilateral trust fund, the final theme on de-risking related to funding is particularly relevant to us, particularly given our focus on public-private partnerships. And so I really see two roles that as a grant-making institution we can help, we can play with this final theme, which we consider to be really critical. First is in terms of funding projects that focus on creating the enabling environment, particularly government policies, regulations, and incentives that drive circular practices. And an obvious example is, of course, downstream regulations requiring businesses to recycle, leading to less residual waste. But we really try to emphasize more upstream examples to try to create that loop for circular solutions. So we're looking at regulations, incentives, policies such as taxing or banning plastic bags or bottles. This creates demands for alternative products and systems, which also can be subsidized by government. And so these are the types of projects we've been investing in, and we're looking at trying to do much more. And then the second category is funding projects that directly support circular business innovations, such as through incubator and accelerator programs that not only provide the seed funding, but also provide mentoring and business and financial acumen and market access to buyers. So, for example, we funded an EBRD project in the Western Balkans that's supporting a range of startups, from textile producers to automotive suppliers that are creating circular products. And so through these two roles, we really see an opportunity for institutions such as ours to help de-risk bringing in other funding from development banks, private investors, or other sources. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah, and really welcome sort of the Jeff joining this initiative, and we're looking forward to working together in the next phase. We have a new panelist joining, Helen Marovic, if I correct, more or less. Yeah, will do for this COP on the last day. And she's with the IDB Invest and heads up climate change. So welcome. So what we have been discussing with the panel is basically the 4 building blocks, and I'll summarize because I think it's important for everybody to hear them again. You know, linking circularity with existing environmental objectives, developing assessment methods, including metrics, building internal capacity, and developing mechanisms to de-risk and improve funding. So if you would reflect on those and sort of look at your institution, what's your perspective? Which ones are key in your area of work?
Thank you. Thank you so much for waiting for me. Let's put it that way. It's been a little bit crazy because my boss that was supposed to be here got sick. She's in the hotel sick, and so I'm kind of trying to clone myself and participate in my panels and her panels at the same time. So this is, I don't know, the 5th or 6th panel.
It's great. It's great to have you. Thank you.
So, in terms of circular economy and the topics that you were mentioning right now, I think that, of course, and I'm sure other panelists have mentioned it, the role of circular economy in the green economy is critical. There is a role to play for supporting Paris alignment, for supporting SDGs commitment with circular economy. But I think that at the end of the day, and I think we've seen this with green investments in general, to know exactly what we're talking about, to be able to move the needle and to have investments in this space is very critical. So having a taxonomy and understanding what is circular economy and what is not circular economy, it's the basis to engage with financiers at the local level. We may, and these studies basically are the basis for understanding what we mean by it, but then we have to bring it down to domestic capital markets, domestic financial intermediaries, as we have done in Colombia, where we are engaging with local banks, bringing all together to basically understand what circular economy is for the Colombian market. Colombia has a circular economy roadmap, but linking it to the specifics of what it is and what it's not, it's critical. So I think that's the initial step when we want to talk about financing circular economy. And in terms of, once we have that taxonomy, in terms of the internal capacities, of course we have to do internal capacity within our institutions, but also in the local markets, to be able to access and to allow for the financial flows to go to circular economy. And I guess finally, once you have that, you can start thinking about linking those types of investments to KPIs. And if you link it to KPIs, then you can use, these new financial instruments like sustainability-linked bonds or sustainability-linked loans
once you have the KPI and the baseline and where you should go. But many times what we have seen when we are developing sustainability-linked loans or bonds is that there is the ambition, but we don't know what's ambitious enough. And so having a map, a roadmap, a strategy, a pathway to know what it is and what to compare it to is very important as well.
Thank you. So I think you make 2 points that really resonate with me. I think the first one is, how can we make it clear, not just for ourselves, and we are already in a bubble, but especially for the people actually on the ground, like a nation. So it's not like hand-waving circular, but we actually really can make it tangible what we're talking about. So I think that's the one point. And the other point I think that really resonated was like, how does good look like? And let's show a bit of ambition here and also avoid the circular washing, if you wish. Because if you have a vague definition, then, and I've heard that, for instance, on the plastics, people go like, plastics is bad, but circular plastics is good. So you sort of just add that circular in front and you fix the problem. So actually, this is actually a really good segue in going to Miranda from the Ellen Carver Foundation. Of course, one of the institutions that has a long-standing reputation on circular economy, and also specifically Miranda has been around the block for a while. So I'm really interested to hear your perspective and hearing the MDBs talk about this topic. Does this have wings? Are we on the right path? What do we need to do?
Thank you. Is that on? Am I on? Yes. Thank you for inviting me to the panel and to be here alongside everyone. I think it's a really interesting discussion. I was reflecting on your question as to which is the most important, and I think actually, for me, what I think is the most important is that there is this IFE circularity exchange network. The different elements that you talk about in the project are absolutely key. I think a lot of people have touched on the taxonomy point, which is important, but between the different regions that you work, World Bank, but we've got IADB and we've got AFDB, and ASDB is not here on the panel, but there are different, they participated. So in the different regions there are different needs. The taxonomy, for example, I think Luigi can probably also add something on the European taxonomy. That's been great, but in discussions with the IADB, also there's a need to customize the taxonomy to where IADB is at now, and also in Africa. So there's an alignment around the broad principles of circular economy and a recognition of where the region is at. So I think that's one of the things that I think is really exciting about this. I think there is still quite a bit to do to move the understanding of circular economy on from pure waste management. It's a natural starting point to look at waste management, and some of that area is more familiar. We know some of the policy tools, for example, we know some of the business solutions, so bringing in more extended producer responsibility and implementing them, collecting, sorting, segregating waste. We know we need to do that, but actually when you look at the progress of those businesses that are trying to do this, there is some progress on bringing in more recycled materials into content, even if the pricing still needs to be worked on. It's the innovation space, though, that is not as understood yet, or understood theory, but that's where the banks come in, both public and private, in order to catalyze that. Like, how do we get to reuse systems rather than only the single-use systems, and then having to figure out how the recycling works for that and making sure that materials at minimum can be recycled? It's different by the different sectors. I think the report notes, built environment, mobility, electronics, even the energy transition. We're here at COP, so to think about the connection between circular economy and the climate is key. Absolutely, we need the energy transition to think about how we power the economy, but we can't power the economy the way it is running now. And even if you want to think really practically about the infrastructure that is needed for the energy transition, all of the materials that are going to go into that, like there's a question about the batteries that are being created now, the solar panels that are being created now, the wind turbines and so on. There's material in that, and every time you extract, every time you then dismantle it, or maybe you can't dismantle it because it wasn't built to be dismantled, and then you have a problem with the emissions from the far end. So in every sector, that integration of both the design factor and the innovation factor, and then of course always behind it is the question of how do you finance it. I really like the discussion, now I'll stop here and let Luigi come in, but I really like the discussion about no, we don't need a global fund on circular economy, and yes, we do need some funds specific to circular economy now in order to get this off the ground. So I think it's a sort of combination of the two. And I've seen it, you've got a fund as part of the Alliance. I think IADB has a fund connected to the Circular Economy Coalition. It's also happening at local scale, so there are cities. You do a lot of work on cities. I know, for example, London, the one that I live in, there is a small fund trying to work with SMEs. I think that's great. And I also like Valerie's idea that long term, let's get it mainstreamed. This isn't circular economy alongside the economy we know. This is circular economy as the economy. So it has to be mainstreamed in the end.
Let me repeat that last one-liner. I think that's really, really powerful the way you said that. And I think the other element I want to, because I think in some of the conversations we were having on the roadmap, and I think that's part of the process, where I think in some of the banks were already quite advanced, they had people working on it, but in some places there wasn't really somebody responsible, and you automatically land at the people dealing with recycling and waste. So we did have that conversation in terms of, yes, that's an important piece. It's often a good place to start. It's typically where most of the investments are being made to date. But let's also explore the full spectrum of other solutions and not get stuck just there. So I think those are really, and that's also, I think, where the whole innovation happening. So last but not least, let me go to Ricardo. You're the sole representative of the private sector, and I think you heard Leah talk about public-private partnerships, about de-risking has been named. If you hear this conversation, and Intesa Sanpaolo is a bank that's been always very forward-looking, what opportunities do you see, and especially what more could you do if this group starts to become even more active?
Yes. Well, first of all, many thanks for your kind invitation. It's really a great opportunity for me, representing Intesa Sanpaolo Group, to be part and to have been part of this great working group led by Circular Economy. Let me say, first of all, that a large banking group like Intesa Sanpaolo is aware of its significant impact on the economic, social, and environmental context in which we carry out our business. So this is the reason why the bank, Intesa Sanpaolo, chooses many years ago to act not only based on profit, but also with the aim of creating long-term value for the bank itself, for its shareholders, employees, customers, and the environment in general, let's say. So indeed, we know that finance, investments, education, and innovation can contribute to effectively addressing the issue of economic growth and progress on a human scale. And together with our partners, so for example, together with the Elevate Capital Foundation, we want to play a key role in this. Sustainability, and in particular circularity, I believe that circularity must be integral to the financial portfolio construction and risk management activities. So this is why we have been so delighted to participate in the International Financial Institution Exchange Network in the past 6 months, bringing into it our expertise in the field of circular economy, which is an economic model that we started to study and promote with tangible financial tools since 2015. So I have to say that today the strategic role and the systemic approach of the circular economy is globally more relevant than ever. I would say acting both as a key strategic plan on one hand, especially within the European Green Deal to rethink and evolve the industrial system, and on the other hand also as an accelerator of crucial topics like ESG standards, environmental, social and governance standards, digitalization and social impact. So coming back to the four building blocks of the roadmap that we designed together, I think that the third one, building internal capacity, is the most important theme in terms of priority, and also to better develop the other three themes, achieving tangible results. So in the end, promote engagement with the circular economy as a key funding direction is necessary, I think, to build a greater understanding and awareness of the topic. And this should be a simple and convincing story about the opportunity provided by circularity to mitigate some climate risks while also having a positive impact both on social, economic and environmental objectives, but also sizing business opportunities. This is the perspective from a private bank, sizing business opportunities connected to the competitiveness of countries and companies as well.
So thank you, Luigi. That was really helpful. And in our engagements with a lot of the countries, but also with cities, actually these business opportunities are, quite universally important, because circularity for circularity's sake, nobody's not that interested in that. It's about the outcomes, and I think if you can address the three ones you're addressing, so the planet, jobs, and the social environment, and doing good for business, I think then you have a winner. So thank you for that. Now shifting a bit to shifting a bit to the next topics, opportunities and challenges. So let me turn to Helen first. So your organization was actually represented, I don't think you were there, initiating this at the WCEF in 2021 at a panel organized by the Dutch government. And I remember moderating it with different people from different MDBs coming in from a completely different perspective. But it got kick-started. Basically, we need to put a group together. So if you reflect on that, what do you see as the opportunities and challenges in sort of, moving forward and funding the transition?
So I think that on the one hand, I think that, at least from what we see in the region, is that the region, there is a big appetite from companies and financial institutions to start working on circular economy. The issue that I see is that, you may have these first movers, but how do you become or make this a regulation to be able to establish basically the ground rules for those that, needed the carrot, they will have the incentive, but also sometimes you may need a stick. And so that's where you may need to have some regulation. And there are some regulations at a regional level, right, and that we are seeing. And the other point, linking it to the issue of jobs that was mentioned before, I think that circular economy could be a chance to articulate net zero transitions and just transition, something that is critical in the conversation that we have seen at COP these weeks. We should not forget about the social angle of net zero strategies, and circular economy can provide an angle and a way, but we need to articulate it better to be able to be more effective in moving and mobilizing more action towards it.
Thank you. Same question to Valerie. Opportunities and challenges ahead.
I think that the challenges that I see, other than the noise in the background, I think they're pulling down the pavilions around us, is I worry about fragmentation. And that's why I think this platform and roadmap is so important, this exchange platform. Because each of us are moving at different speeds, each of us are doing different things, and there's a danger that each of the MDBs will begin to define this differently, measure it differently, and set our ambitions differently. And so we'll end up competing and fragmenting this space, and if we're going to create the circular economy as just the regular economy, we have to do it together, and we have to measure together. I think there is a danger that there's not enough money. I don't think there should be a global fund, but there needs to be money. So having funds in the different banks is extremely important, because within the banks we each need our own fund to do the socialization awareness, to do the capacity building, to have the money to buy down the price of a loan for first movers who want to be in this space but don't want to test this space having to pay market price for that loan. So we need those funds, each of us. We just don't need a global fund, in my opinion. We also need money. One of the challenges, I think, is we're not talking enough about policy. Because this isn't a space where necessarily it should all be bottom up. Every company testing it, everybody trying it. I think there has to be some regulation, and there has to be harmonization. Because the circular economy at the end of the day largely comes down to trade, not only, but a big part of it will be driven by the rules of trade. So we have to talk about regulation and harmonization and trade rules. And as part of that, and Helene, you brought up the idea of sort of the transition and the just transition, that also means we have to make sure, and one of the challenges is that we're providing transition finance. Because what we can't have in the circular economy is that this becomes an excuse to kick out of supply chains those mini, small, and medium-sized enterprises, because they won't have the capital to actually transition to meet the rules of the game, and they'll be locked out of markets. And it'll become anti-competitive for those smaller, more important, small companies and small countries. And so we need that transition finance, and we all need to agree on timelines so that we don't end up having these perverse impacts on developing countries or smaller market players. Those, to me, are some of the challenges, but this is a huge opportunity. There's a hunger for a new way of doing things, and not just because it's a nice to have. I know I've said it before, but because it's must-have. We're running out of affordable, accessible, and cost-effective ways to run the economy we currently have. So we need to have an economy 2.0. It's got to be the circular economy.
Thanks, Valerie. I like how you ended. So big opportunity, but let's make sure we avoid fragmentation. There's enough money available, and also we bring in the relative regulation, especially on the trade side. So thanks for sharing that. Let me turn to one of the virtual participants, Leah. Same question for you. What is the opportunity and what are the challenges?
Well, thank you. I agree with Valerie's point on the need for more policy consistency, both in terms of trade, so more at a regional or global level, but also within countries. Another challenge I really see is rather fundamental, which is that the idea of a circular economy is still a rather new and emerging issue for many governments and businesses, particularly for understanding how it would benefit not just the environment, but jobs, health conditions, and the economy. And a few weeks ago, I was at a regional Southern and Eastern African meeting, and I was talking with government representatives from about 15 participant countries about the funding that Jeff has available related to reducing plastic pollution. which were emphasizing circular economy solutions. And generally, there's great appreciation for the environmental benefits in terms of carbon, hazardous chemicals, biodiversity, and so forth. And that all relates to this first theme of linking environmental objectives with circularity. But then when we actually got into the circular economy strategies, there was great interest in downstream efforts. This relates kind of what Miranda was saying earlier, and an understanding of waste collection and recycling. But when we started talking more about upstream solutions to reduce single-use plastic products and to move towards refill and reuse systems, the interest was less clear. And one of the country representatives boldly raised their hand, and I'm glad they did. They noted they were not supportive of these downstream efforts of these reuse refill systems because they were concerned about the economic burden on local companies and job losses for such a transition. And so this led to a bigger discussion. There were other countries, including the host country of Rwanda, that had experience with these. They highlighted what their experience had been, subsidizing refill systems, creating new jobs, better labor conditions, and so forth. But this discussion really brought home to me that there's still a fundamental challenge of getting a greater understanding of what circular economy is all about and how it works in really practical, tangible ways. And I think this also gets back to this idea of having a circular economy fund, because we need clearly more funding going towards circular economy, but it has to be tied to very clear sector impacts. And the ones that have emerged that I think are continue to be very important are related to the electronics, the plastics, the building, and the food sector. And so I think through working for those, we really can demonstrate to these key stakeholders that we can create a better, more sustainable and circular world. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. I think what I find interesting in the panel discussion, I think we all agree more money needs to be going to circular. I think we're just debating what the best vehicle is, which I think is a better conversation to have. In any case, I would like to go to the next topic, and I think it was earlier mentioned is like what does good look like, and I think on the preparation is framed slightly differently, but I think ultimately that's the question. So let me turn to Miranda first. Sort of what would good look like? And I know I'm putting people on the block here.
What would good look like with regards to, I mean...
What is your ambition, right? If we truly want to make the circular economy the normal economy, which I think was your great one-liner, what would good look like?
I mean, I find it difficult because it suggests that there's one thing, and obviously an economy is complex and has multiple sectors and multiple actors in it. So I think maybe to answer that, I would say in whoever the actors are that you're talking to about circular economy, there is this need to understand what it is, and that it's not just a question of managing the resources at end of life. It's thinking completely differently about how you provide things. And often, I mean, water is right in front of me, right? I need the water because I'm thirsty. I don't really care about the packaging. And so if I go into a shop and it's provided in a plastic bottle, I will buy the plastic bottle. It's not really what I wanted the content. So that's just one example to sort of rethink, okay, what is the actual need that a project or a product is actually trying to meet? And then how can you reimagine providing that? So, I mean, for example, in the city that I live in, they're installing more water fountains again, because then as long as I have a container on me, I can get the item that I want. So I think that understanding of what the circular economy opportunity is, that it's not just a question of materials management, but it's thinking really about what are the human needs and how do you provide that. That's fundamental. But then what does good look like after that, after the sort of rethink and redesign of how we provide human needs happens, is each actor sort of understanding the role that they can play in that and who their partners are. So, for example, with the multilateral development banks, it being integrated into their core mission, which is always about economic development, that is absolutely fundamental. Then to have the private sector alongside that is key. Policymakers also in different forums. I was having a really interesting discussion with someone about, well, if you're integrating it into the COP process, what could be the thing that happens there? And at the moment, the big focus in COP is about the financing, right? So also, how do you integrate circular economy into where the investment flows in order to lead to better climate outcomes? But there are lots of other policymaker forums. So, for example, in the European Union, they're currently working on what would upstream product innovation policy look like. And in addition, there's a wider movement going on around, well, how do you get EPR implemented? That, there are different forums for different things. And so I think it's a long answer, but I think fundamentally, what does good look like? Good looks like understanding what the concept is and then recognizing the role that you can play. We're an NGO and we try to convene and raise understanding. So what can you do, and then who are your partners in trying to deliver that? It's my first attempt at that question.
No, I think it's actually, I think sometimes if you ask these very hard, almost philosophical questions, you get like really new viewpoints. So basically, the way I'm hearing it is, let's approach circular economy from an holistic point of view. So not define it too narrowly, but make sure it doesn't just include waste management, material management, but serves a bigger purpose. Basically, the economy 2.0, if you wish. I think that's...
And I'd add to, I gave the water example, but there are many different ways that you can provide me that need. And I think the other thing about circular economy when you're talking about it like this is, you say the words over and over, circular economy, and then you realize you're not actually sure what someone's talking about. So also breaking it back down to again, move from circular economy back to a particular sector. So if it's on the built environment, start thinking about not just the materials that go into it, you always need to think about that, but also how is the building constructed so that it could be deconstructed. But if you're in the fashion sector, it's going to be different. So how do you make the product available so that in the end it doesn't hang in my closet for 6 months until the next time I need to wear it, but how many other ways could you provide that? So I think it's also important to jump between circular economy as a holistic overall concept and then relate it to specific sectors, specific locations, who's in the specific location and who are the actors that, informal sector has been mentioned many times, so how are they involved in this? I think you have to move between the holistic and then the specific in order to make it real.
Yeah, great addition. And I think the second point that resonated with me was let's make sure the different actors all take the responsible for the piece they can take responsibility for, and there's also a clear role division between two. Actually, I like this question so much, I'm going to ask everybody this question. So Davina, over to you.
Okay. What does good like?
What does good look like if we're successful with this initiative?
Right. I think good will change over the different periods. So where I come from, maybe we are the starting of the journey on this, but ideally what we would want to see is circular economy creating the right jobs, circular economy being good to nature, and circular economy contributing to long-term development. And with that comes with ownership. So we have to have the communities that are anchoring this feel part of the solution. It cannot be circular economy that is breathed down by the Development Bank. I think you, Monday, mentioned concepts. So breaking it down that the people who are supposed to be affected by it understand their role in it and also own the shifting arrangements in driving circular economy. Definitely as development levels change, the good will also change in terms of on the targets of what we are looking at. And lastly to say, one, ownership is critical to that. Behavior change is another critical area. And number three, for us, and we've spoken a lot about here, finance and policies are very, very key to drive the change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Over to Valerie. What does good look like?
I'm very glad I didn't have to go first.
I know. That was a tough question.
I'm going to say amen to both of what they said and then add a couple of things. One is we have agreed metrics. And if we came together in a year from now, we would all define circular economy in the same way. Because right now we seem to define what it is. And it's not just waste management. It's not just materials management. And really have a definition. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that we would have the beginnings of a harmonized policy framework to understand what good policy looks like in this space. Being able to use and understand for each policy what the impact is on the environment, what the impact is on that policy and what it does on people, which often means jobs, and then on cost, the cost at the household level and the firm level, because this is something we did, for example, with the plastic policy simulator, where when we're working in Indonesia, they want to ban single-use plastics. And that's always the easy, let's do that. It's not easy, but it's the first thing people pick. The challenge with it is in many countries, many communities, alternatives to single-use plastics are neither available nor affordable, and sometimes they're not the problem. And so we have a plastic policy simulator where you can think about all of the bucket of policies and the impact each of them will have on the environment, on jobs, and on the cost to firms and households, and what the right mix is, so that altogether you get the biggest impact on reducing waste and changing materials management, the least impact on cost to households or on the environment. So we have to have those sorts of tools and that sort of harmonization of policy. And finally, good to me is when we're not having just this conversation at environmental meetings, but in mainstream economic fora, so that at the next G20, at the next G7, circular economy is just automatically on the agenda.
Thanks, Valerie. So definitions, harmonized policy framework, better assessment on costs, and let's get out of our bubble. Over to you, Helen.
So I would just add one, I mean, I agree with all of the things that were mentioned, but I would add just one point, that in addition to analyzing, to doing the design from the start, I would also think that at some level, at some point, we also have to take into account the risks, the climate risk impacting the design. This morning, I started my morning with a climate risk event here, actually. And it's interesting, we're evolving and we're trying to understand the physical climate risk and the transitional climate risk. But I think that, I guess it's not necessarily also the good, but also the ambition is, let's bring these components together so that when we do a design, we're not basing it on a material that it will be impacted by climate change.
Thank you. So I think we have about 8 minutes left before we have the closing words from the minister who just arrived. Thanks for joining us. And I want to go a bit more on the action side of things. So maybe short intervention from each of you, sort of 1 minute. What should we do as a group, and what do you feel your organization should contribute? Maybe we start with the online panelists, Leah.
Great. Well, let's see. So what we can contribute and the priorities as a group. So I guess as a group, one thing, of course, I agree with all the points that have been raised, and I like it, particularly this idea of mainstreaming, that we need to be each champions going to these other sectors, so that it's not just the G20 meetings, but it's also the actual sector meetings, so the hotel association meetings, the energy sector meetings, the fashion sector meetings, that all of those where they're promoting circular economy solutions and getting them to shift their practices. So I agree the mainstreaming is an area we might need to add in. The other thing I didn't hear us really talk about is system change, that we need to, and maybe that's just assumed is kind of the end result, but when people think about circular economy, as Miranda mentioned, and Helen, I think also, there's a lot of focus on the end of life, the waste management, and we need to shift that to more upstream solutions as well. And that means thinking about not just recycling systems, but also these reuse, refill systems, and particularly getting governments and the businesses to take responsibility for this instead of putting the onus on the individual and expecting each person to be walking around with their reusable cup and their reusable bag and their reusable utensils, and the list goes on and on. So that's kind of the big picture things I think we need to work on. And then at the Jeff, because we are a philanthropic grant-making institution, I think we have a really important role to play in this de-risking by being a first investor and helping to not only fund policy change processes such as national and city action plans that we've funded, for example, on plastics, but also in helping invest in early phases of some of these innovative companies and startups.
Thanks, Leah. Same question to you, Luigi.
Yes, and please let me share with you also the perspective from the private sector, and I would like to add on what has been already said, that from our perspective it is fundamental also to leverage partnerships in order to proceed with a shared agenda, for example among the private sector or financial industry and the international financial institutions like multilateral banks, also working together in terms of advocacy activities, for example, to influence governments and central banks, and to build awareness and new knowledge connected to the circular economy. So to find together new ways to develop innovative financial tools or economic tools for the circular economy transition, let's say. I want to conclude just sharing with you a well-known proverb said that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. Well, this is true, I think, more than ever for such an ambitious and systemic transition. Businesses, financial institutions, and also government must work together to deliver the economic, environmental, and social positive impacts expected from the circular economy at scale.
Thanks, Luigi. And I remember, I think when this project was a couple months underway, I asked Marvin and said, so, okay, where are we? Is the roadmap already finished? And he said, we just got everybody in the same room. And I later spoke to some of the MDBs and said, wow, I'm really impressed you got everybody in the same room. That's a major accomplishment. So I think, indeed, getting the group together and getting organized gives us a great platform to continue. So I'd love to hear from the African Development Bank. What's your perspective, both as a group as well as from the African Development Banks in terms of next steps?
Right. Indeed, we also start from getting everybody in the room through the Africa Circular Economy Alliance, which is a platform. It's a country-led platform, but it's hosted within the African Development Bank to basically collect ideas. We know the challenge on data, we know the challenge on resources, but all that is in pockets of, if we could aggregate what each one of us has, I think we could get to about 70% of what is needed, but it's hidden in our little institutions or our own data sources. And so when it's shared, it kind of gives us great perspective on what needs to be done. So that's number one. Number two is to ensure that the countries that we support own the process, and that's basically the alliance is country-led. And what we do as ourselves, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, is to be strategic partners to it. So the alliance has a website, all this information is there. Last year, there was research on what are the 5 priority areas, they're called 5 big bets to engage on circular economy for Africa. Ultimately, we're looking at working on an African Union Circular Economy Action Plan. So all that is geared to have a common pathway around driving circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you already mentioned Ellen MacArthur Foundation, so great to hear from you, Miranda.
I mean, I like the advocacy point that was made, and I think maybe I'll just riff on the quote. I think we are going to have to do both. I think we have to go fast together. So I think going fast, obviously, I think you have to do it in a way that considers that there's a transition. There are difficult questions to be answered because transitions is change, but we're going to have to change. So we have to iron those things out. But yeah, we, in our work, for example, one of the areas that we've looked at is plastics, and we've set quite ambitious targets, which over 1,000 organizations have signed up to. They are ambitious. That's in order to get us to go fast. We're actually not quite on track with them, but at least it's starting to bring in the data and the knowledge. So also to build on that point earlier about having common metrics, we kind of need to be doing both at the same time. We need to be having a go and getting on with it, at the same time as working out what are the targets, what are the indicators that we're going to work to, because we need to go fast and we need to go together.
Thank you. Helen?
So I would add to too many microphones. I would add the sharing of experiences. Once we go back with clients and try to implement the ideas, that's where we learn if it works or not. It's kind of, we can calibrate it with the real examples. And I think that sharing of experiences of what works, what doesn't, what needs to be changed, how can we adjust the indicators to have a harmonization that it makes sense in the real world, I think that can help us a lot.
Thank you. And finally, Valerie?
I think we have to, the next steps, we have to keep talking with the idea of convergence in mind, but not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And we have to keep the interests of poor people, poor countries, and micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises at heart. This has to work for them. Not for big business, not for countries that are doing well, for the poor. That's our job. Count on the World Bank to be part of this partnership, and we'll all keep faith together.
Thank you, thank you. So, without further ado, I would love to invite our Minister of Environment of the Netherlands to the stage. They have been, as I think I mentioned before, initiating this project at the last WCEF, which was also co-organized by the Dutch government. So we're very grateful for their support in getting this off the ground. That being said, I think we need more people to engage, also other governments, and broaden the platform. But without further ado, please take the stage for the closing remarks.
Well, thank you so much for the warm words of welcome, and I'm sorry I couldn't be here from the start, but I enjoyed the discussion that I heard, and it's so important to share information and knowledge with each other, so we can all learn and benefit from that in order to go faster. So we all know that also financing the transition to a circular economy is crucial if we want to achieve our goals. So today's event with the launch of the high-level roadmap is a new milestone on the difficult but necessary journey to a fully circular economy. And without a doubt, the transition will significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. At least 45% of all current emissions are linked to the way we produce, use, and discard our products and materials. So it's clear that if we don't drastically improve global resource efficiency, it will be impossible to limit the global warming, and we will not reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius limitation as agreed in Paris. But there are more reasons why the transition to a circular economy is very crucial. Significantly accelerating the circular transition will help us tackle pollution and biodiversity loss too. And it will help us achieve the global sustainable development goals of 2030. So that tells us why we have to move towards a circular economy, and I really enjoyed you talking about how we can reach these goals. And one of the main pillars is obviously circular financing. And it is my conviction that all national and international financial institutions have a role to play there. So I'm pleased with the excellent speakers who took part in the discussion today. And good to see an all-female panel here. That's always nice. In recent years, many fragmented initiatives have emerged around the globe in the fields of sustainable finance, climate finance, and circular finance. And this roadmap, which has been welcomed by many international financial institutions, will help us to skip a few steps and prevent us from having to reinvent the wheel. The aim is to advance both climate mitigation and circularity through everyday lending and investment practices step by step. So starting with financial institutions, the multinational development banks can develop a system in which circularity and climate resilience become the default in lending and investment practices. The high-level roadmap that we're presenting today is a solid start of the process to working together to create a harmonized framework of definitions, of methods, of indicators and data, which you already mentioned, and that can all be used in our daily practice and in your daily practice. And of course, besides financial institutions and commercial parties, governments also have an active and constructive role to play, especially in creating the right market incentives. And these incentives will enhance and help scale up circular solutions put forward by the market and by other stakeholders and disincentivize linear practices in the long run. So you can count on me also to help broaden the community of practice, challenging other financiers and governments to join this movement. And I hope that we as the Netherlands and Circular Economy can also count on you. Therefore, let me ask you to free up the necessary resources and support the continuation of this important exchange to finance the circular economy transition. And to conclude, I hope that next year at the COP28 in the United Arab Emirates, we will meet each other again and that we will be satisfied with all the good work that we have been doing all together to implement the roadmap. So let's get things moving. There's still a lot to do, and I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. Thank you.
So let me wrap up. I think we're pretty last panel at this COP27. I think the closing ceremony is, I think, about 2 hours from now. But let me, on behalf of the, or host the Benelux EIB Pavilion, also in particular the Dutch government, but also on behalf of Circular Economy that Marvin and I are representing, a big thanks to both the audience as well as our excellent panel of today. I thought it was a really good, meaningful discussion. I realize I was not always asking easy questions, but that's a little bit of the privilege of being the moderator. You just have to ask the questions, not answer them. Normally I'm in the panel, so I really enjoyed it. So a big thanks to all of you, and indeed, let's make sure we make some real progress towards next year. Thank you very much. And maybe we can invite you on the stage. We'll take a quick picture with the group here.